in such a way where I am strong but also soft? Sthira Sukhasasanam. How do I bring that into my days, into my relationships?
Welcome to the Wisdom of the Body podcast. I'm your host, Heather Grzych. Here, we talk about the profound connection between mind, body, and spirit. Join me and other authors, wellness experts, and everyday individuals talk about the importance of listening to our bodies, trusting our guts, and living in deeper harmony with nature. So, whether you're seeking guidance on your wellness journey or simply looking for inspiration, you're in the right place. We're thrilled to be in the top 3% of podcasts globally. You can find the Wisdom of the Body podcast on Apple, Spotify, and most other places where people listen to podcasts. You can follow by joining my email list at heathergrzych.com or by following me on Instagram at Heather Grzych. That's Heather, Grzych. I know you're going to love this podcast, so take a second right now to subscribe. Today, I'm here with Peter Walters, who is a Bay Area yoga teacher and a devoted student of life. He teaches an experiential, sweaty, music-infused, and celebratory Bhakti flow yoga practice. And he's got over a decade of teaching public classes in person and online, and leads workshops, retreats, and global festivals. He's on a mission to help people become students of their own lives, to practice acceptance and kindness, to open their hearts, strengthen their voices and their bodies so that they may truly begin again for all beings. Peter has a former life. He had a former life. He was an EMT and a tall ship sailor. Can't wait to hear about that. Fisherman, line cook, and a social entrepreneur. And when he's not teaching yoga, you can find him motorcycling on windy roads, reading in the sun, and going on hikes with his trusty companion, Sir Huckleberry Finn. This is definitely starting to sound like a dating ad. There are
It's nice.
500 people that want to date you right now.
Oh boy.
That's a great bio, Peter.
I thought you wrote that.
Thank you so much for being here today and excited to chat with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm going to start with the question I usually ask people at the end. I felt compelled to do this today, which is, what does the wisdom of the body mean to you?
That's a beautiful question. That the body knows. The mind, I once heard this quote, like, we're often just a mind taking a body for a walk, which is to say we're disconnected from this whole organism of who and what we are, that we are sort of slaves to our thoughts and our sense perceptions and our desires and our cravings and our aversions. And the body is ultimately the truth teller. The body keeps the score, is so raw, and there's no other way it could be. That, you're going to feel the nuances of this body yelling at you or being appreciative of you. And we get to experience the body sweating and getting tight or getting limber or getting stronger. It's the ultimate truth teller.
Yeah, thank you so much. It is interesting. And I feel like a lot of people, when they start doing yoga, that the feeling that comes is like, wait a minute, I've been carrying this thing around with me my whole life. I don't feel like I really know what's going on there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's really, these body practices are so important to connect the mind and the body together. And I've been to your yoga classes. So for anybody who hasn't been to one of Peter's classes, it's not your typical yoga class. I feel like I was raised Catholic, so I have this very vivid memory of going into a church with a girl from college. And in her church, when you walked in, everybody smiled and said hi to each other. And they were laughing and talking and socializing. And I was flashing back as I went into this church with her of my experience of growing up Catholic and how kind of sullen everything was and serious.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what is everybody doing? They're talking. And so when I come into your yoga class and I notice people are happy and talking to each other, and that you encourage that, there's something different about what's happening in that room than what happens in other yoga classes. Can you talk a little bit about what is that thing that you do there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure a lot of teachers will say this, but like, it comes from the grace of my teacher emulating his expression of the practice. And I was always just mesmerized and just touched by the way that he expressed yoga. Like yoga can be expressed in so many ways, through philosophy, through very detailed anatomy, through perfect, well thought out sequencing, through recitation of sutras and mantras. And like, there's this huge body of yogic wisdom and information. And my teacher, Rusty Wells, his premise was that like, we can use this practice to celebrate. We can infuse it with humor. We can bring lightness. We can bring joy, even as we work hard and get our butts kicked and sweat. And I think my natural proclivity is lightness and joy. Like, I've been blessed with that gene of waking up most days pretty happy. My oscillation is from, I start at 85 and go to 100, and bad days, of course, dip. But my natural standpoint is like pretty grateful and awake to life. So all I can do is share that. So that was my first real impression of what yoga can be. And then I went to enough other yoga classes that were great physically, strong, interesting, in like they brought something beautiful out. And yet like you walked into the room and it was quiet and nobody looked at each other. And it was like, we are having this internal, very private experience, no matter what. Why don't we at least start by acknowledging that we're in the same space together and we're about to share in this experience? Let's greet each other, be like, all right, let's do this. We're in this together. And that's what people love about stuff like Soul Cycle and Barry's Boot Camp, is that you're on your own treadmill and yet we're sharing this experience. So I want to create the environment where people can feel connected, even though we are alone.
I love it. Yeah. I mean, it's like you're here. Why pretend you're not around a bunch of other people? That's really beautiful. It's funny you mentioned Rusty, because I remember the scene, back in the day in San Francisco. One of the things I was curious about chatting with you about today is the yoga world and how it's evolved through the years. And I remember it feels like we had this heyday in San Francisco in sort of the early 2010s, or just in the 2010s. And there were these massive studios. I mean, these majorly huge classes, because I remember I used to go to Rusty's class back then. And that spirit, I see how you've carried that social connection spirit forward, because I remember that in there, but also what a crazy zoo it was, remember, and how big those classes were.
Mm-hmm. That was like my real first taste of yoga. I was part of a yoga club in high school, but I had ulterior motives when I was younger. But when I came and found Rusty again in the early 2010s, it was just a mystifying experience. Being in a room of 120 people, half naked, already sweating before we began, Bollywood music playing, incredible incense. Like, what is this environment? It was totally new. It was fitness meets spiritual practice meets whatever else it is. And it was just seductive. And I kept going back after my first class. And it was a void in my life that I couldn't quite place. I didn't grow up with religion personally. We went to a Unitarian church some holidays just for community, but I didn't have that tether to spirit, to devotions, to any concept of the divine. And I always felt it. I always felt connected to something. I was like, this can't be it. This material world, like, we get to live and there's butterflies and porcupines and trees and plants and like everything's coexisting. The evolution story doesn't satisfy my soul. And Rusty and the experience that he cultivated really did. It brought you home to yourself. It brought you home to the collective. It brought you home to God, whatever God means to you. It brought you to a larger viewpoint of life and what it means to be alive. So yeah, I just kept going. I just wanted more of that. Whatever it was giving me, it was incredible. The sweat, the heat, the loud music, the intensity, the prayer, the chanting, like all of it was just so much. And I think my first few years teaching, I copied Rusty. I'm okay to say that now. Like, I didn't have the language. I didn't have the vocabulary of my own experience to infuse in that. And it's taken a long time to integrate his teachings into my own and to use my own language. And still, a lot of my words are his. And it's beautiful because I think of him virtually every class I teach, 10,000 classes in. So yeah, he's always on my shoulder.
I'm so excited that you brought that up, because I haven't really talked about that with anybody. When I used to teach, I noticed at one point when I went to India and I studied in India and I came back and was teaching after that, I noticed my voice had changed. The way I was teaching had changed, because I was essentially like channeling the teacher that I had in India. And it was the first time I realized that I couldn't tell if I was being fully authentic, but I knew that voice was coming through me and it felt good to come through me. It felt good to channel that. So I've not heard a lot of people talk about that. So I'm glad you brought it up. And I remember doing a training with Anna Forrest once, and I kind of went to one of the earlier days of her training. She used to let people just come and like practice with them in the morning during teacher training. So I would go and practice with her for 3 hours, have her kick my butt for 3 hours in the morning. And then she would go off and teach her trainees. So I'd get there at like 5 a.m. She'd kick my butt and then I leave. But I got to observe how she was teaching the teacher trainees. And she had them memorize scripts, like specific scripts, word by word. And I think they do that in Shivananda as well. It's very like scripted.
They did that actually in my training. That was part of our homework. Was he had an audio recording of him teaching an hour-long sequence, just him to a microphone. And our homework was to learn it, to transcribe it word for word before the AI days where you could just push a button, you had to do it, and memorize the sequence and memorize the script. And thank God at the time, it was such a wonderful way to venture into the practice, is that like I could kind of not worry about the sequence and not worry about what to say. Cause I knew the flow. I knew the verbs, the actions, the primary cues to offer. And I could focus on being present and being there. And the art of teaching, the art of teaching is so much more than just warrior one, warrior two, here's the perfect cue. It's like, how do I show up in the space? How do I create an environment where people are willing to put something down and really willing to move through their unique process? So yeah, like I used to poo-poo the idea of giving somebody a script, but I think it's a great launching point. And then over time, over the number of classes I taught, I was like, okay, I can throw in an ab sequence here, or I can get rid of this. That word, that phrase, that sentence doesn't resonate with me. I'm going to find another way to say it. And then slowly, it became my own sequence. It became my own voice. So I'm a fan of doing that for new teachers.
Yeah. I think it's probably similar to how people learn in a lot of different fields. I mean, a lot of what everybody's learning is memorized information. And then later, the kind of artistry comes as you develop more mastery. So you mentioned that you actually, was this like you found yoga when you were in high school? How young were you when you found yoga?
It was sophomore, junior year in high school. We had the little trailer classroom outside, and they did a yoga club with the gym teacher. And it was all women and me. And I think one of my guy friends were like, it'd be great to do this, just us and a bunch of girls. It was totally a sophomoric motive, but it was my first taste of the practice. And it didn't stick, obviously. But when I moved to the Bay in 2011, the woman I was dating at the time, still so grateful for her, brought me to Rusty's class. I was going to the gym every couple days and in that, and she was like, I heard about this experience I think you would love. I was like, I don't know. I don't think so. And she's like, just come. And we did. And like the first class is still just seared in my brain and my heart of this beautiful experience of just being in a puddle of my own sweat and being in this intense hot box and then being wrapped in this cocoon of love and devotion and a spiritual something or other in the air that felt like home.
Yeah, it was really special there. And I saw people because I used to go periodically and I'd see everybody would go like all the time, right? So many
Mm-hmm.
regulars. And I could see the transformations people were making with all those elements that you just mentioned. And this idea of bhakti, what does bhakti mean for people who aren't familiar with it?
It's the yoga of love and devotion at its core. And that's what everybody says. And then I try to push deeper. I'm like, well, what is devotion? What does that really mean? And we have thousands of years of spiritual tradition to see what it looks like in other cultures of prostration, of prayer, of running mala beads and chanting japamala. Like it's bowing to something that is beyond you think is greater. And sometimes people look to their teacher as that being and that essence. And that's sort of misguided. It's seeing that teacher as the one, whereas the teacher is just a funnel for the one or just a reflection of the one. And you can ideally see the divine through their eyes. Really beautiful teachers, I think, like that's where they succeed, is that they can express the inexpressible through their gaze, through their touch, through their words, through their song. So for me, devotion is looking beyond the small self. It's looking beyond Peter. It's looking beyond the smallness of my life and my perspective and opening my eyes wider, and like in politics for me has always been such a beautiful playground to see where Peter, small self, ego is getting caught, and then to look at the bigger picture, all that, to see this from all sides, to see this from this big vantage point that isn't so personally invested. Yeah, it's been
That's
a whole
hard.
journey. Yeah, of course it's hard. It's so human of us to pick sides and to pick things that we like and preferences and that which we don't like. But Rusty would often say, like, I offer this to all beings everywhere. And that's like such a big thing that's easy to say, but to really to feel it, to love all beings. All beings?
Mm.
What about that one? What about that one? But yeah, can you love them even if you disagree with them? Can you see their humanity and give them a hug?
I'm not going to hug certain people.
Okay, but you have to love them still.
I might be a little more self-protective though. Well, you can hug everybody because you seem pretty strong. If anybody mess with you, that you'd be, in good shape.
Maybe. But it's the aspiration, right? Is to see yourself in everyone and see everyone in yourself, even the one who seems so deplorable, who has done the most horrible things. It's like, well, have you ever done anything bad? Have you ever screwed up royally, said the thing, done the thing? And if you say no, like, you're probably lying. Most of us have really screwed up in some way or the other. And to not see that capacity in others and to not be compassionate is sort of missing the point. And like, yeah, we're all going to get caught in the dramas, in these narratives of someone is better than the other, somebody's a bad guy. But I think of it as people do bad actions, but is that person at their core bad? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, begin again. This is a phrase that you use a lot. I feel like I also saw you wear a hat that said it. Tell me about the story behind begin again.
Well, I wish I could take credit, but again, this is sort of a common Buddhist phrase, which is you can use moment to moment in any meditation, which is your mind, anytime you sit quietly, you start for a moment and maybe you're present with your breath, the sensations, and then snap your fingers and your brain is off planning for the next thing in your day or remembering that you had to do something that you forgot and remembering some interaction. Then you go down this train of thought that just pulls you away from really where you are. And that mantra just can bring you back. I love it because it's perfect for the micro moment. It's perfect for meditation. You catch yourself, begin again, start again, take a breath, recenter in the present moment. But it's also really good for the various chapters and phases of our lives, of our days, like maybe you had a crappy day yesterday. Everything went wrong, everything fell apart. And then you wake up today and you can still be stuck in that narrative and that mindset, or you get the chance to clear the slate. And as we often say, like, the circumstances are not in your control, but how you view the day and your life and this experience is up to you. You have control of regulating what you do with this circumstance, whatever it is. So yeah, I fall over, I stumble, I mess up a lot. And I just try to be kind to myself and say, begin again. You screwed that up. Try again here and now, today, right now. So, and I love it just in the middle of a yoga class. I'll be teaching and we're going, and then I just somehow completely forget my sequence. Sometimes I just stop class, and be like, what did we just do? And somebody, some kind soul, will be like, we just did warrior two on the right side. It's next is warrior two on the left side. I'm like, thank you. Begin again and not get too caught up on it or beat myself up. Just start again. And I think that phrase is just so helpful for all of life, for all people. Start again, move on from the thing and start again right now.
Well, you're saying that you screw up too, because I feel like everybody has this perception that yoga teachers are perfect human beings, that they must eat so healthy, they're the healthiest eaters. They do the best kinds of self-care. They're up at 4:30 in the morning for Brahma Muhurta. What do you have to say to people who might assume that you're perfect as a yoga teacher?
Well, we can look at this on a couple levels. On one level, I am perfect, and you are perfect, and your life is perfect, and life is perfect, and nature is perfect, and everything that you think is imperfect is actually perfect. So if we can start there and realize that this is just the way it is, and because it is that way, it's perfect, right? But we're human, and I'm okay with the mess of my humanity, that I wasn't raised in such a way that has fostered enormous discipline, or I don't know, there's so many things that can bring one to living a disciplined, perfect life and also the other. And we can say it's our ancestors, we can say it's our parents, their fault for the ways that we have succeeded or failed. But I also did a trip to India and I learned from different teachers, and I came back playing the yogi. I happily wore that costume. I wore a man bun. I wore my mala beads everywhere. I wore yoga clothing. I think I had an air about me that was the yogi, right? Like I saw many yogis and ascetics in India. I was like, that's sick. Like I want to be that guy, because it was just, they were so cool and calm, and their eye contact was scarily deep. And I wanted to do that. I played that. And then at some point I realized, like, this isn't who I am. I want to go have a beer. I want to just do messy things. I want to misbehave. I want to be a rascal. I want to eat the pizza. I want to wake up at 9 a.m. and not 5 a.m. So while I don't succumb to all my base hedonistic desires, I try to be kind to myself and try to dance in the space of carrying the lineage of these really beautiful teachings that did begin with monks and yogis and sages, and also live in the modern world that includes iPhones and Instagram and AI and junk food. Like, how do I exist equally in both those places without hating myself? Because there's been a lot of self-hatred. Oh, I'm not doing the things that I should as the yogi. I went vegetarian and I was like not feeling good in my body. I didn't feel strong. It's like, okay, I'm going to eat animals again. And I feel better. I feel strong. I feel vital. So I've gone through this whole range of, on the spectrum of yogi to messy, messy human. And it's finding balance within yourself where you strive to do your very best in the way you eat, in the way you talk to yourself, in the way you relate to others, and to give yourself permission to screw up and begin again.
I know you're probably familiar with Ayurveda and that it's holistic approach to health, and we deal a lot with lifestyle and food and herbs and stuff like that. Do you ever incorporate other wellness practices alongside your yoga in your personal practice for just kind of rounding out your self-care?
I think a lot of my other wellness practices are like Huberman-esque in that I'm kind of playing with modern science and biohacking stuff that seems interesting, whether that's supplementation or cold hot therapy, or, I go to the gym more than I practice yoga asana. Like I go to the gym 4 or 5 days a week because I love the way it feels to get stronger and to watch progress happen. I try to be mindful of what I eat 85% of the time. And I like to eat some delicious garbage occasionally.
What's a delicious garbage? What's one of those?
Just a big old pizza, cake, cookies,
Oh, I love pizza.
ice cream, all just the sugary delights that do terrible things to your body.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, you need a little sugar. It's not like people shouldn't have any sugar, right? Come on.
Yeah. Agreed. I feel best when I eat meat, vegetables, and fruit, honestly, but I'm gluten free recently, which feels fantastic. So, yeah, nothing crazy.
What are some of your daily rituals?
I've recently, in the last couple months, started reading before bed, which is so simple, but I would like oscillate. It could take me 6 to 10 weeks or a year to read one book sometimes. And I finally just committed, like, when I get in bed, I'm going to start reading. And I love it. I found like some trashy thriller novel series that I love. And it just keeps me reading like book after book. I can't stop. So that's a great one. I just started journaling beginning the new year. I mostly write just drivel, like very simple thoughts and what I did for the day, but I like the practice and the ritual of trying to have some sort of reflection that's like put on paper rather than just a passing thought. Walking the dog every day is ritual. Meditation, seated, comes and goes. I still teach yoga on Zoom, so I have a physical practice a few days a week just by necessity, which is, it's nice because it forces me to get on the mat to be in service. Red lights at night. I try to have a bedtime of 10:30 or so. So I'm just like slowly dialing it in as I figure out what works well for my mental and physical health.
Yeah. Yeah, I was wondering because you still teach on Zoom and what that's been like as a yoga teacher to kind of start. I'm assuming you started teaching in a world where Zoom was not common, and that later it became very common in the pandemic. And I don't know where it's at now, but it does seem quite different. What is that like for you and for the students for the experience of doing yoga on Zoom versus in person?
I was really beautifully surprised with how rich it can feel to practice and also to teach yoga on Zoom. I mean, for first 8 years of my teaching, it was all in person in studios, and that was great, but I wasn't practicing along. I was the teacher who would walk around the room and watch bodies, and I wouldn't practice because it felt indulgent. It didn't feel like I was really being of service to the people in the room. It was like, I'm going to practice because I want to practice. But I realized if I need to practice or work out, do that before you teach. Take care of yourself and then serve others. But Zoom is, because of the medium, I think it helps to practice so people can see to see your body. I do both. Sometimes I'll sit and teach, and other times I'll practice along. But I was happy by the richness of connection and community we could foster on Zoom. And when the pandemic began and I started teaching online, we had hundreds of people coming to classes, and it was just like, whoa, like all these people who I saw in person are now gathering on Zoom. And it was so energizing and so fun and so connected. And we had like breakout rooms and conversations like after practice. And it was just so cool. And as the pandemic sort of wore on, I created an online studio of sorts that had class packs and memberships and paywalls and all that stuff. And it's still going. I guess we're 5 years in. And while the numbers have shrunk fairly dramatically, there's still folks all over the US and in Europe who are still practicing regularly 3 days a week. So it's cool to like keep that thread going.
Yeah. And it's also interesting kind of adjusting back to being in person more. I took my practice virtually in the pandemic. I closed my physical Ayurveda practice. And then I've been actually virtual since. And I have gone back and forth about going back in person ever since 2023. And for me, anyway, it's really super different. But yeah, there is something that's still so great about Zoom or just any video type of engagement that you said it still is beautiful. Yeah, just different. So your dog is so cute. And does your dog crash your yoga classes when you're on Zoom?
He does, not as much as he used to. I invite him in sometimes when he's feeling snuggly, and he'll kind of like just snuggle. Especially when I'm like sitting and teaching, he'll come and just rest his head on my lap while I'm teaching the whole class. I have a heater in there, so he like gets all cozy. When he was a puppy, he was infamous for coming in and pooping or peeing on the mat while I'm teaching.
Oh, no.
Just some hilarious videos of that. But yeah, he likes to be involved sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
super cute. Do you think people are like their dogs?
Yes. Yeah, I think more often than not, I'm not surprised by the dogs that people have and the people that the dog has. They seem to most usually be a good fit. Whether it's like a tall, lanky person who has a really skinny race dog, it's like, of course you have that dog. Or just like an old lady who has this tiny little cranky dog. Just, it's out of a movie, but it's often that way.
What kind of dog would I have, Peter? I don't have a dog. Tell me what
I
kind of
don't
dog
know
I
what
would
kind
have.
of dog I could see with like a maybe a Weimaraner.
Oh, that's fascinating. I like those. Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. If I got to pick, which, I have an 8-year-old, so he would have to pick the dog, I think. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And then it's also nice when people get a very different dog than what you'd expect them to have. So that's always a fun surprise.
yeah. You mentioned that you're reading before bed. What are some of the books other than thrillers? Are you reading other things as well?
I'm kind of like deep in thriller mode right now. I found a series that I love, and just like it reads like a movie. And those are the books that I love because they just like, you can't put them down and they keep me excited about reading. I love the idea of reading. I'm just looking at my stack of, the rich nonfiction book that everybody tells you to read. But I do better with audio books of like nonfiction and good fiction that I will actually read. I'm reading the Gray Man series right now, and I'm on like book 3 in a month. And just so satisfying reading 100 pages an hour. So it's fun.
100 pages in an hour?
Okay, maybe I'm embellishing a little
You're
bit,
a
but
speed reader.
some pages. I plow through a lot of the book every night, which is
Wow.
wonderful.
Yeah. Do you have any all-time favorite books?
Bringing Yoga to Life by Donna Farhi is one of my favorite pictures of yoga that is very full spectrum and is all about yoga off the mat and like how what we do on the yoga mat is just the launching point for the real practice of yoga that begins off the mat. So she kind of takes that premise and just runs with it, and it's beautiful. And I used to buy it like 10 copies at a time and give it to anybody. I also really like Awareness by Anthony DeMello. I think it was originally like a talk or something that's been transcribed into a book. That's really beautiful. It's sort of the power of now-esque in that it guides you into the present moment and helps you see life more clearly as it is without all of our many filters. I love Shantaram. That was wonderful. Yeah, so many. How about you?
Oh, wow. Favorite books. For a long time, I only read spiritual books and like personal development type things, spiritual personal development and poetry. And then a couple of years ago, I actually started reading sci-fi.
Nice.
I had this thing when I was big into meditation that I didn't want to read fiction, that I only wanted, I don't know, it felt almost like bad to read fiction. I was like, no, fiction is not real. And I want to only focus on things that are real. And so when I started reading fiction, it felt kind of like bad and rebellious. Kind of that you have to find your own way of doing things that's not necessarily exactly what your teachers told you to do, but actually what you want to do. Yeah, I think that's one of those things for me. So I really like sci-fi, and there are books that I pick up all the time and reread, like certain translations of the Yoga Sutras, the mystical books. I like a lot of mystical books and Rumi poetry and things like that. But I do like Asimov and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, I mean, and then like the Surrender Experiment was really potent for me. Michael Singer, I think his name was, and the Ramayana.
Mm,
But what translation was it? It was Ramesh Manon, maybe. It's so good. It was so colorful and vibrant and beautiful, and like, yeah, I loved it. I read it twice. And it's like 1,000 pages. It was such a
wow.
good. Yeah, I think it's a must read for any yoga teacher who wants more than the asana. It's like it's a very practical, human yet godly expression.
Yeah. We'll talk about that a little bit more. That I think it's an important thing that we all kind of get some inkling of, not sure we quite understand, but like the yoga beyond the asana. What is that? What is the yoga beyond the asana?
If we think of yoga as a practice of, well, the word, right? To yoke, yug, union, right? So in my mind, we're trying to see everything as one, just to simplify it to its absolute essence. How do I live my life in recognition that it's all one thing? That all the things that seem separate, all these items, the animals, the people, the thoughts, the feeling, it's all from one shared essence. That brings me a lot of peace that I can just relax my shoulders into the present moment because it's all one thing. What am I trying to say in this? How can I also bring the teachings of an asana class into the world, into my life, into my relationships? How do I move around in such a way where I am strong but also soft? Sthira Sukham Asanam. How do I bring that into my days, into my relationships? How do I bring drishti, steady gaze, into everything I'm doing, into my work, into my relationships? So there's so many concepts that we play with on the yoga mat of strength and balance and patience and persistence and flexibility that are all words that can beautifully translate into everything else we do, right? Like your flexibility of body is much more important. Your flexibility of mind. Are you open minded? That's sort of what we're saying. So every cue I give in a yoga class, I think we can translate to a cue that you could use for your life, root down and rise, find your roots, find your foundation, find your character, and then be open to rise and experience more of the beauty of life that's beyond anything you thought. So yeah, it's sort of to like take what happens in the yoga studio and then find ways to fit those nuggets of wisdom into your life.
Yeah. The yoga mat, the yoga class, the yoga practice, such a good teacher. Peter, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for, I feel so much calmer after talking with you. No,
Oh,
that's the thing, right? Like even the energy of the practice and how it carries out into other parts of your life, so cultivating a certain kind of energy on the mat cultivates it in other parts of that life too. And
that's the
Lord
hope.
knows I have not been practicing yoga as much as I wish I were, but there's
Well,
other.
as you know, the moment is always ripe to begin again.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that
Thank you for having
permission, for
me.
that reminder.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this, letting everybody know today who isn't familiar with your work, to how do they connect with you? How do they take class with you? How do they
Yeah.
travel with you? Because I know you do some cool retreats and stuff.
Yeah. So everything's on my website, peteryoga.com. I do weekly online Zoom classes, Monday, Wednesday, Friday mornings. And I teach at a studio in Sausalito, California called Cloudbreak. And I also work and teach at a place called The Portal in Mill Valley, which is a social wellness club where we offer yoga and biohacking and epic experiences. And then I'm leading some retreats this year, El Salvador, Mendocino, Iceland. So I'm always trying to take the practice to beautiful places because it's such a good foundation, of course, to experience your life. After doing a meditation and chanting and moving through a physical practice, to then go out in the world, you're open, you're receptive, things have shifted within you. So to take that as our context to amazing places is just so cool. It lights the place up in ways that I'm always amazed by.
Thank you so much for all your reminders about love, about devotion and practice. And thank you for being here today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
If you are embarking on a fertility journey and are ready to have your mind blown about what your body is really capable of and how it's impacted by the environment, then check out my book, The Ayurvedic Guide to Fertility. You can actually download the introduction to the book for free on my website at heathergrzych.com. That's Heather, Grzych.com. Read the intro for free and then buy the rest of this fertility enlightening book pretty much anywhere books are sold.
Feeling like there's just not enough time in the day? You're not alone. Many of my clients, like Jessica, come to me overwhelmed, struggling and feeling the effects of aging. After just a few Ayurvedic sessions, Jessica was sleeping better, her digestion was regular, and she felt her vitality again. Ayurveda isn't about adding more to your plate. It's about creating balance so you can make time for what matters. Ready to reset your health and your life? Visit heathergrzych.com and book your consultation today.
Thank you for tuning in and dropping in with us today. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. I really want to hear your feedback. To learn more about my work, visit heathergrzych.com. That's Heather, Grzych.com. And meet me here next time on The Wisdom of the Body.